Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the talk today. So this talk is about a relatively new actor that we discovered, and we called them as SneakyChef, and it is based on the type of payloads that they were using, also those names that we had given it to them. So before we start, a short intro. That I work as a threat researcher at Cisco Talos, and I'm based in Singapore. And my research focus is I would like to work on crimewares and ransomwares most of the time. So in today's talk, we're going to see who is this SneakyChef, and then I would take you all through a couple of intrusions that they have conducted and its analysis through the attack chains that they have done, and then we will look into the payloads that they used in those intrusions. And then also we see a bit of information about the C2 communication patterns that they have used while communicating to the C2, and then we see about the assertion that how or what are the overlaps that we are seeing with the other threat actors and the SneakyChef that based on the TTPs that they're using. So to start with, who is SneakyChef? So SneakyChef is actually an advanced persistent actor, but we are not sure whether they are state sponsored or not. And they are Asian actors who are active since 2023 with an intention of espionage and data theft motives. They have conducted multiple intrusions and campaigns during this time, targeting government entities and private sectors in EMEA and Asia. And some of the notable TTPs that we observed while analyzing those attacks and the intrusions were they mainly leveraged on spear-phishing campaigns as an initial vector. And then they've also employed DLL side-loading techniques, which means like using legitimate DLL to side-load the malicious DLL during their attack kill chain, and they've used custom C2 protocols and also abusing some of the legitimate applications that we will see that how they have employed or instrumented those techniques in their attack in the coming slides. And then the malware and tooling in their arsenal, mainly they've used two bespoke malwares. One is SugarGh0st that we named, and another one we named it as a SpiceRAT, which is a modular rat, and it has its plugins. Now let's take a look at the campaign or the intrusions that the SneakyChef has conducted. So these actors, as I said, they started likely they started operating since August 2023, and they conducted multiple intrusions with multi-stage attack chains, where their attack chains and the techniques that they've used are a bit complex, and they have many stages in their attack kill chain. And mainly they were after victims' intellectual information or the credentials, and they were espionage focused. And we have seen through some of the intrusions that they've mainly targeted Ministry of Foreign Affairs and their embassies in EMEA and Asia. And some of the potential victims that we observed, which we highlighted here, that includes so Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and even India, and some of the foreign ministries in Angola. So these were a few of the targets, or I would say potential targets that we saw, and we assessed these potential targets based on the decoy documents that we observed in the intrusions or in the initial phishing or the spear-phishing samples that we saw. These are some of the decoy documents that we saw, and a couple of them we saw them available on the internet, but some of them are not available on the internet, which means they are a kind of scanned copy of the official documents. But at this stage, or during the time of research, we were not clear that how the threat actor got hold of these documents. And based on our assessment, potentially, it could be, or it could be a resultant of a previous data breach incidents would have happened, but due to the limited visibility on those emails that we had during the time of our research, we could not deduce that how they get hold of these documents. So now we saw the type of campaigns that they do and the targets that they had in their list and some of the decoy documents. Now let's take a closer look at the intrusions that they conducted. And here in this talk, I would like to share 5 different type of intrusions or the attack cycles that we observed that the SneakyChef conducted. In some of them, they deployed SugarGh0st RAT as the final payload, and in a few, they dropped SpiceRAT as the final payload. So with the first intrusion to talk with, so they used LNK or the Windows shortcut file as the initial vector. I mean, after the phishing email with the attachment of RAR file, and when the user tried to click the masqueraded LNK file, so that had an embedded JavaScript. With the help of C script, they executed those JavaScript. So then at the next stage, this JavaScript dropped 4 different files in the victim's machine, one of which is the decoy document, and another one bat loader, and then another DLL called massdog.dll that we observed, and then an encrypted file with a name called dplay.lib. So after dropping all these, the JavaScript start to execute the bat file, and then the bat file, So the bat file, and the bat file executed, started this DLL, which loaded the encrypted file, decrypted it, and then reflectively injected the decrypted payload, which is the SugarGh0st RAT, into the run DLL32 process, which connected to the C2. So this is the first intrusion that we observed, which was not that much complex or nothing special that we found in this intrusion, although there is a side-loading component in this. So in the second SugarGh0st infection attack cycle, it was almost the same. So instead of LNK file here, they used SFX-RAR as the initial vector, and that had a VB script, and then again it continued, like loaded the DLL, which again loaded the encrypted SugarGh0st RAT and decrypted it and injected and ran in the victim machine that connected to the C2 and started its operation. This is the second infection cycle that we observed. So the third infection cycle is somewhat which we found it interesting, because the technique that they have used is not very often seen by many threat actors using this. So what it means is, here, after the first stage, the link file that runs the JavaScript, it drops the components into the victim's machine temp directory. And these components, similar to the first infection cycle, one of which is a decoy document, and then another legitimate DLL file, and then the encrypted payload. So here, the interesting part is, the legitimate DLL file is called dynamic-wrapperx.dll. So what is this dynamic-wrapperx.dll? And initially we thought that it could be another legitimate DLL, and it is just a side loading that they are doing, another malicious component similar to the first attack cycle. But it turned out to be dynamic wrapperx DLL is actually an ActiveX component, using which a VB script or another JavaScript can call the Windows API functions. which means here the dynamic wrapper X DLL, when it is loaded into the memory, it will provide the APIs for the scripts to execute from this dynamic wrapper X DLL. So that's what the actor did it here. So after dropping this, using Reg server 32, they run this dynamic wrapper X.dll so that it got loaded into the victim machine memory. And after that, the JavaScript had an embedded base64 encoded component, which is actually a shell code. So that it decoded, and this shell code was executed with the help of APIs that this dynamic wrapper X.dll provided. So the JavaScript was configured in such a way that using the APIs that dynamic wrapper X provided, it executed the shell code. So after executing the shell code loaded the encrypted file that we saw, the dplay.lib, and here in this third intrusion, the name was libeavy32.lib, which is actually an encrypted component of SugarGh0st RAT. And this shell code, actually, it decrypted that and then injected into the victim's machine process. And then finally, it started communicating to the C2. So here, the concept of using a legitimate DLL, which is dynamic wrapper X, and you through the JavaScript, you're calling the APIs to execute the shell code. This technique we found, one of the technique we found it interesting, which is not very oftenly seen by many other threat actors in the threat landscape. So this is about the third intrusion. Now let's see the fourth intrusion, wherein which the payload was SpiceRAT. So like others, that in the initial phase they use the LNK file and to start up with the infection. So in the LNK file that they configured the command to call another legitimate application called launcher.exe. So before going to the intermediate phase here, the RAR file which we are seeing in this attack chain had an hidden folder. And in the hidden folder, there were other components like decoy PDF, another legitimate executable called launcher.exe, and the malicious DLL, as well as the encrypted RAT. So when a user or a potential victim, when he unzipped those RAR file, it created another hidden folder in the victim's machine, and then dropped all the components in the victim's machine. And when this link file was executed, so it initially called this launcher.exe. This launcher.exe, actually it acts like a, I would say it behaved like a loader in this attack chain, wherein which you can see when it was executed, it opened the decoy document. So, and at the same time, it executed the legitimate exe. So they were configured here, I mean, all the components that were previously dropped into the victim's machine, and those names were configured in this launcher.exe, and when it ran. So what happened when this legitimate executable ran? This legitimate executable ran, again they used the side-loading technique that it loaded the malicious DLL, and the malicious DLL called this encrypted RAT. It decrypted and injected the decrypted component of SpiceRAT into victim's machine memory in the final stage. But this SpiceRAT still, again, it connected to the C2 and downloaded the encrypted component of its plugin, and still that decryption process happened, which again it injected and then started communicating to the C2. So this is somewhat modular, or the multi-stages that they use, multiple level of decryptions, as well as the technique of like side loading. So this is with the third, fourth infection type that we saw, where they use the SpiceRAT as the payload. Then the fifth one, the final one, they used still SpiceRAT as the payload, but here instead of LNK, they used HTA file as the initial vector. So in the initial phase that we can see, so the HTA file has got the embedded components, I mean embedded base64 strings and all those that they, when it ran, that it decoded, and then the next stage comes to some of the batch files. So all these batch files here in the initial stage, what they did is, so they established the persistence or created some of the scheduled tasks using some of the predetermined names that in future in the attack chain, the components that is going to be dropped into the victim's machine. So that they did in the first stage. So after configuring all these things, when this base64 encoded string, which is actually dropped as a text file, it appeared legitimate, and with the help of cert util, they decoded those components and they ran it. So then when they moved to the intermediate phase, and in the intermediate phase, they started this downloader.exe file, that's another component here which you can see, which actually connected to the download server where they had hosted a malicious jar file that they downloaded with the use of hard-coded URL, that they download those zip file, unzipped it, and then it dropped again all the legitimate components into the victim's machine, like a legitimate exe, then a malicious DLL, and another encrypted component, which is highlighted here, which I have highlighted in the box here. But all these legitimate components which were dropped, and their names were pre-configured in the first stage itself in the scheduled task. So when the legitimate exe ran, then the malicious DLL was side-loaded, or it was loaded, and then again the malicious DLL loaded the encrypted component of the SpiceRAT, decrypted it, and that's what it happened. It followed the same phases, like it decrypted and it ran in the memory, and then it connected to the C2, downloaded the plugins, decrypted it again, and started the plugins actions. So now we were thinking that what this RAT is doing and what the plugin is doing, we are going to see the functionality of those payloads, that what they do. But before that, they still also did some of the activities that I mentioned, that apart from those bad files, they still also configured some of the things in the program to establish the persistence, like scheduled tasks. And also, like I mentioned in the final stage, like how the encrypted payload was decrypted in the memory and ran in the victim's machine memory. So these are the intrusions or the attack chains, so 5 different attack chains that we observed in this campaign. And another important thing which I would like to highlight here is the name of the encrypted component. This was the encrypted component which was dropped as a help file. The name is CG-MIMP32.HLP, and the legitimate executable or the legitimate exe that was dropped in the attack chain was actually the runhelp.exe, which is the Samsung helper application which was dropped. And also they use this .help file to replace the legitimate help file of the Samsung helper application, and they instrumented that in this attack chain by abusing those legitimate applications. So this is one of the things that we observed there, like how they've used this. So now let's take a closer look at the payloads that they've used. With the first one is the SugarGh0st. SugarGh0st is actually a customized variant of Gh0st RAT, and it has customized in such a way that features such as reconnaissance capability and other facilities, like to facilitate commands that are directed from the C2, were modified and changed when compared to the Gh0st RAT. And also, here too, it also facilitated remote administrations to the attacker, and they have used some of the modified communications protocol to connect to the C2 with this SugarGh0st. Being said that, some of the other functionalities like keylogging, they created some folder called WinRAR in the program files and hooked to the keyboard and wrote all the keystroke to the winlog.txt. And then this SugarGh0st also has the capability to manipulate the processes and services, that it accesses the configuration files running on the services, and then it had the capability to either start, terminate, or delete the targeted services. And then it can also delete the event logs to hide the to hide their detections. They can delete the execution events from the event logs. And then also, like I said, it facilitates some of the commands that are directed by the C2 so that this RAT would perform a specific operation. And here are some of the commands that I have listed, but the command list was extensive. It was about 80 or 70 different hexadecimal commands that we observed, which were hard-coded in the binary. So this is about the SugarGh0st RAT functionality, and then the next is the SpiceRAT. So the SpiceRAT is again a Windows executable of 32-bit, and then with the capability to debug the environment or debugger environment and establish persistence, and also it leverages on the usage of lol bins, and then it also exfiltrates data to the C2. And also the SpiceRAT is a bit modular, as it had its own plugins, and we identified two different plugins that they've used, and one they called download and another one to run the binaries. And it provided backdoor to the victim's environment, paving a way to the future attacks, which means I will show you how the plugins works, which kind of opens a backdoor so that any arbitrary binaries or another executables can be again downloaded onto the victim's machine and run by the attacker. So when it ran, it first created the mutex, and then it did the reconnaissance and collected a couple of information like host information, user, IP address, MAC address, everything, and encrypted those recon data. And then it sent those recon data to the C2 server. So the C2 servers were hard-coded in the binary, and when it sent all those information to the C2 server responded back to the RAT in the form of this HTML tag. So they used to get response in between in the form of the HTML tag, and in between there were encrypted response message. And this RAT used to receive that and decrypt and process those response received from C2. So with that being said, also this SpiceRAT, like I said, has two plugins, and in the attack chain, once it starts running in the victim's machine, it connected to the C2, downloaded those plugins with those two names that we can see. One is download and another one is run as. So what these download plugins do is it just acts. Download plugins do is, like in the previous slide, we saw that once the RAT sends the recon data to the C2, C2 sends an encrypted response. So this download plugin will access the decrypted response, which the RAT decrypts in the victim's machine memory. This download plugin will access those decrypted messages and process those messages and perform and copies the file or do the disk activities, that it drops any files that were downloaded to the victim's machine. And then this run as plugin that we identified, again this executes other arbitrary functions using the winexec function. So this is about the functionalities of the payloads, and quickly we will take a look at the communication patterns that we observed. With the first one is the SugarGh0st RAT. We observed that they had 8 bytes of hexadecimal, I would say the magic header kind of thing, because the Gh0st RAT usually used the standard Gh0st RAT. They had a start of 5 hexadecimal bytes with Gh0st kind of, but in this sample that they modified into the 8 bytes, which you can see the hexadecimal value that these rats started to communicate to the C2, and it collected couple of information while doing. Whereas with the SpiceRAT, we saw a bit of different unique patterns, that the request message were sent with bytes like 1 QM, 2 QM, and the response used to get as 1 GM, like 2 GM. And with the first message that I said, the encrypted recon data went to the C2, and in the response while communicating in second or third message, we saw that encrypted plugin was sent back to the C2, which is the PCAP that we captured while we were seeing. And this was decrypted and ran in the victim's machine memory. And this is one of the other indicators that we saw, which is also a valuable indicator to either hunt for this type of rat or to detect this traffic which the SpiceRAT is communicating. Then finally, before I end, I would like to share some of the overlaps that we saw. So in couple of decoy documents that we analyzed from the metadata of those decoy documents, we saw modified field name with the simplified Chinese names. And then we also saw some of the comments in the SFX scripts that they employed in the attack chain was in simplified Chinese. And also the Gh0st RAT malware is a mainstay in the China threat actor arsenal and has been active since 2008, and we saw that is being customized and modified and employed in this attack. And also, I did mention that they've used sample Samsung helper application, that runhelp.exe, and the help file was previously seen in other campaigns where they dropped plugx and SpyIVRAT. And these campaigns were operated by China APTs. And then also we have seen that the Chinese threat actors or the APTs have a history of targeting government agencies, especially Ministry of Foreign Affairs. With these information and the overlapping TTPs, we assess with low confidence that the SneakyChef are Chinese-speaking threat actors. With this being said, I'm concluding my talk today, and thank you everyone for your attention.